Well, I'm still working on the sunroom, but I'm just about finished. The last thing I need to do is put down the shoe molding, but before that I need to make it. So right now I'm going to make 80 feet of custom shoe molding and then I'll install it. I'm making the shoe molding out of poplar and I'll get started with a 1x6x10 and a chamfer bit in the router. I've already tested the profile and next I'll run the router along the edge of the board. Now I'll flip the board over and do the same thing on the other side. Now I'm over at the table saw and I'm using a scrap piece of wood to line up the width of the molding. The offcut will be the molding. I'll use this scrap piece of wood and trace a line on the table saw insert. And each time I cut the molding off, I'll move the fence over until the edge of the board lines up with that line. So now I'm going to do the exact same thing 4 more times. And in case you're wondering, the reason why I'm using the offcut for the molding is I just feel a lot more comfortable running a wide board through the saw as opposed to a bunch of narrow boards. It's often the narrow board or the narrow piece of wood or molding that will get bound between the blade and the fence, and that's when you have a high likelihood of getting a kickback. On that last piece of molding, you might have noticed I pushed the molding halfway through the saw, then flipped it over and finished the cut basically in the middle of the saw. And that's to avoid pushing a narrow piece of wood through the saw. I cut my finger once on a table saw, just a small cut, but that's how it happened. I cut my left hand and I was guiding with my left hand in front of the saw, which is a really stupid thing to do. The wood kicked back and drag my hand over the saw, and I just cut the tips of the index and middle finger. So I'm really not nervous. I'm not nervous around the saw, but I respect the saw. So now that I've got all of the molding made, I'm going to prime it. For a primer, I'm using Fresh Start by Benjamin Moore, and I'll apply it with a foam roller. I let the primer dry, then sprayed it with 2 coats of gloss white enamel, let that dry overnight, and the molding was ready to install. Okay, well that was the last piece of molding, and I'm finally finished with the sunroom project. I will be making artwork for that room and maybe a piece of furniture or two. And as I make those projects, we'll revisit the sunroom so I can show you how it all turned out. Next week, I'm getting organized. I'm going to find a home for all of my tools. I did end up getting a new miter saw. I ended up getting the Bosch. And the plan right now is to build it onto this work table here. And that should be next week's project. And then I'll get the shop organized again and be able to start building furniture. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.